Greetings and welcome to everyone. My name is Kelvin Ampofo and I serve as the 2nd District Representative of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Here we are again, 1 year dealing with COVID-19. As usual, we have special guests here for you tonight to talk about this pandemic, and we have a special guest to discuss the vaccine. As always, let me give our disclaimer. Certainly, I want all of you to be mindful that the comments and views expressed by individuals tonight are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity or any other entity that the speakers may be affiliated with. Certainly want to acknowledge all of our brothers and sisters from the National Pan-Atlantic Council that have joined us tonight. And certainly on this last day of Women's Day, we want to salute all of our ladies, all of our women. Thank you so much. Regardless of individual awards that may have been given, we want you to know that all of you are appreciated and we love all of you. Going to go ahead and get started with our guest. As you know him, we're going to start off with Dr. Boykin. He is a retired pediatrician and obviously has all the latest news as it relates to pediatric care. Dr. Boykin, good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for joining. Please give us an introduction.
Well, I just say welcome to everyone that's joining us tonight. I just want to say that, as our brother Mpofo said, we've been dealing with this over a year now. And so, we started out some time ago with this pandemic. We had to figure out what it was, we had to figure out how to deal with it, and we had to figure out how to prevent it and treat it at the same time. So with that, vaccines were developed. So, we spent a lot of time. We've come a long way, and we're getting to some light at the end of the tunnel. But I want everybody to just think about it. Everybody needs to do their part. We still need to do all the things we need to do in terms of wearing our masks, watching our distance, and washing our hands. But I certainly hope you will get some information here tonight that will help you think about, at least consider getting the vaccine, because that's the way we're going to put this pandemic behind us. Thank you, Brother Mpopo.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Boykin. Certainly our next doctor, no stranger to the brothers at all, live and direct from New York City. We know that this was the epicenter when this all began. Certainly Dr. Jedan Phillips, 88. Good evening to you, Doc.
Good evening, brothers. How y'all doing this evening? Again, it's an honor to be here with the Four Horsemen and our leader, the district representative, Brother Kelvin Mpofo, and our new guest that's here today. Welcome everybody. As Dr. Boykin just said, yes, it's still a year that we're dealing with this. And even though we've had some improvement over the past month or so, as far as what has happened with the vaccine and the messaging of masking and protective measures that are coming from our leadership of our country, we have not seen the numbers drop. They've plateaued. They plateaued, and unfortunately, there's a big concern that we may be on the verge of a fourth surge. And what are the things that are contributing to that? Of course, the rolling back of safety measures that are being done in multiple states across the union have contributed, because we've seen that the COVID rates have gone up in those areas. Also, as we've gotten to this year, people are fatigued, the weather is getting better, and people want to travel. And unfortunately, as you travel, the other thing you become exposed to is these variants, which have a higher degree of effectiveness or the ability to cause infection. And these are the things that are unfortunately contributing to the numbers not dropping and starting to increase. So again, we've got to hold it steady. We can't be laxed. We can't relax. We can't allow our fatigue, because we are close. And if we are having a surge, this is different than previously, because we do have the vaccine available. And one of the things that can be helpful with us getting vaccinated is we hopefully can keep these variants at a minimal level, because unfortunately, the longer we have high levels of virus in our environment, that's more of a reason for the variants to continue to mutate. And if they continue to mutate and change, then the things we've done thus far, the vaccines we've developed, those vaccines will not be as effective. So we are in a race. We need to be vaccinated, and we need to, again, continue to message that to our communities, because with what the president recently said, we're looking at May 1st to be a time where every person 16 and above in the nation is a candidate to get a vaccine. And as I've said many a time before, if you jump out of the line and say you don't want to get the vaccine, let's make sure we do it for a good reason and not for just fear. So again, continue to be vigilant, my friends, and let's get this vaccine if that's something you want to do. I think it's something that will make a difference, and hopefully it could prevent us from having this fourth surge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phillips. Let's go to our next horseman. Certainly, for those of you that don't know, this brother has a story, but everyone always asks the question, what is the government doing? And certainly at this time, I'm going to bring forward our brother, Brother Wonzie Gardner, to share some words with us at this time. Good evening, Brother Gardner.
Brother Amphofo, thank you very much. And to my other horsemen, good afternoon as well. To the audience, I'm glad to be here. Someone has already made a comment that we've been going through this for about a year. Just got off the phone with another young man who had a loss like I had as well. And it's amazing what a year's worth of time will do. Some of us are stuck in different places. Brother Jedan Phillips talked about in May that we should be at a place where we can get this back to some sense of normalcy. I was on the President's Management Council meeting this morning, and it was stated that COVID is here with us forever. In other words, what that means is that it'll probably be more like the flu. Hopefully, we'll have it contained in the future where we can go back to some sense of normalcy. But I want you all to know and to think about this when you're talking about a vaccine. There are a lot of us that are scarred for life. We've all had traumatic moments, but some of us, life will never be the same. And what I mean by that, we have made losses and had losses that will never go back. I thought I was in a pretty good place because I've been cocooned in this house, and I went down to visit some friends, and I recognized my life had changed because I saw young couples with kids and whatnot, and I was thinking about my loss and how I've been able to deal with that. And I thought I was ready, guys. I'll tell you, but when I went out, I wasn't. And so as we go through this thing, when you talk about a vaccine, whether you're going to get it or not, sometimes don't just think about yourself, but think about those that you're leaving behind. The pain, the scars, the agony, and the waves of guilt, the waves of loss, the waves of regret, they don't get easier. Okay. You just learn how to deal with it. So my note to my brothers and everyone on this call is we're all going into a new normal. And I like to say this: as we go to that new normal, you can have an attitude of gratitude, or an attitude of defeatism, or an attitude of I don't care. And I choose to have an attitude of gratitude because I think no matter what may have happened in the past, we're all still here right now. And we've got a great speaker coming behind us. And so I want to thank my brothers, and I want to thank you guys for the support that we've given each other as we've gone through this process. Brother DR, I turn it back over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brother Gardner. And with that, our special guest for tonight, we have a new doctor that has joined us tonight, and I'm not going to steal his thunder, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce to us from Kappa Chapter, 1977, Dr. David Sinclair Arnold. Dr. Arnold, it's such a pleasure to have you join us tonight. Please introduce yourself and share some words with us at this time.
Thank you very much, Brother Pofo. I really appreciate their offer to have me come on to talk. And I want to thank all of my brothers there for having me speak on your webinar series. This is a great service to our community, and especially in light of the urgency that we're facing and in the fight against COVID. I am currently serving as the medical director of psychiatric emergency services for the Veterans Affairs Administration for the state of Maryland, and as an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry for the University of Maryland School of Medicine. I'm quite pleased to share what information I have on COVID-19 in order to further highlight the urgent need for all members of our communities to get vaccinated. There has been much information, misinformation, and many questions regarding vaccinations. One of those questions is, which vaccine should I get? It's been on the news, and people have been questioning it and asking each other what they think is the best. I'd like to share a video concerning the efficacy or effectiveness of the various vaccines that are available, and I think it'll shine some light on what's available and what the differences are. So if you want to go ahead, we could show the video and proceed.
Okay, we're going to have everybody grab that popcorn. I know everybody's been purchasing that fundraiser popcorn. So go ahead and pull out your popcorn. And Brother Pierce, if you can cue us up, let's watch this very informative video briefly.
Mm-hmm. This is the new one-dose COVID-19 vaccine from Johnson & Johnson. In early March, more than 6,000 doses were supposed to be shipped to the city of Detroit, Michigan. But the mayor said no thanks.
Moderna and Pfizer are the best, and I am going to do everything I can to make sure the residents of the city of Detroit get the best.
He was referring to these numbers, the vaccine's efficacy rates. The vaccines from Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna have super high efficacy rates, 95 and 94%. But Johnson & Johnson, just 66. And if you only look at these numbers, it's natural to think that these vaccines are worse than these. But that assumption is wrong. These numbers are arguably not even the most important measure of how effective these vaccines are. To understand what is, you first have to understand what vaccines are even supposed to do. A vaccine's efficacy rate is calculated in large clinical trials, when the vaccine is tested on tens of thousands of people. Those people are broken into two groups. Half get the vaccine and half get a placebo. Then they're sent out to live their lives while scientists monitor whether or not they get COVID-19 over several months. In the trial for Pfizer-BioNTech, for example, there were 43,000 participants. In the end, 170 people were infected with COVID-19. And how those people fall into each of these groups determines a vaccine's efficacy. If the 170 were evenly split, that would mean you're just as likely to get sick with the vaccine as without it, so it would have a 0% efficacy. If all 170 were in the placebo group and 0 people who got the vaccine were sick, the vaccine would have an efficacy of 100%. With this particular trial, there were 162 in the placebo group and just 8 in the vaccine group. It means those who had the vaccine were 95% less likely to get COVID-19. The vaccine had a 95% efficacy. Now, this doesn't mean if 100 people are vaccinated, 5 of them will get sick. Instead, that 95% number applies to the individual. So each vaccinated person is 95% less likely than a person without a vaccine to get sick each time they're exposed to COVID-19. And every vaccine's efficacy rate is calculated in the same way. But each vaccine's trial might be done in very different circumstances.
So one of the biggest considerations here when we look at these numbers is the timing in which these clinical trials were performed.
This is the number of daily COVID-19 cases in the U.S. since the pandemic began. The Moderna trial was done completely in the U.S., here in the summer. The Pfizer-BioNTech trial was primarily based in the U.S. too, and at the same time. Johnson & Johnson, however, held their U.S. trial at this time, when there were more opportunities for participants to be exposed to infections. And most of their trial took place in other countries, primarily South Africa and Brazil. And in these other countries, not only were case rates high, but the virus itself was different. The trials took place as variants of COVID-19 emerged and became dominant infections in these countries, variants that are more likely to get participants sick. In South Africa, most of the cases in the Johnson & Johnson trial were that of the variant, not the original strain that was in the US over the summer. And despite that, it still significantly reduced infections.
If you're trying to make one-to-one, head-to-head comparisons between vaccines, they need to have been studied in the same trial with the same inclusion criteria in the same parts of the world at the same time.
If we were to take Pfizer and Moderna's vaccine and redo their clinical trial at the same time that we did J&J's clinical trial, we might see quite different efficacy numbers for those.
These efficacy numbers really just tell you what happened in each vaccine's trial, not exactly what will happen in the real world. But many experts argue this isn't even the best number to judge a vaccine by anyway, because preventing any infection at all is not always the point of a vaccine.
The goal of a vaccine program for COVID-19 is not necessarily to get to COVID-0, but it's to tame this virus, to defang it, to remove its ability to cause serious disease, hospitalization, and death.
It helps to look at the different outcomes of an exposure to COVID-19 like this. The best case scenario is you don't get sick at all. The worst case is death. In between, there's being hospitalized, severe to moderate symptoms, or having no symptoms at all. In the absolute best circumstances, vaccines give you protection all the way to here. But realistically, that isn't the main objective of COVID-19 vaccines. The real purpose is to give your body enough protection to cover these possibilities. So if you do get an infection, it feels more like a cold than something you'd be hospitalized for. And this is one thing that every one of these COVID-19 vaccines do well. In all these trials, while some people in the placebo groups were hospitalized or even died from COVID-19, not one fully vaccinated person in any of these trials was hospitalized or died from COVID-19.
One thing that I wish that Mayor would have understood was that all three vaccines have essentially 100% effectiveness in protecting from death.
The mayor of Detroit did backtrack and said he'd start taking Johnson & Johnson doses because it's still highly effective against what we care about most. Efficacy matters, but it doesn't matter the most. The question isn't which vaccine will protect you from any COVID infection, but which one will keep you alive or out of the hospital? Which one will help end the pandemic? And that's any of them.
The best vaccine right now for you is the one that you're offered.
With each shot that goes in someone's arm, we get closer to the end of this pandemic.
Wow. So, and let's just, I mean, that was a lot of information, a lot of valuable information in that video. And if I can say, at least one of the main takeaways for me is, I wrote this down. Anyone that was vaccinated, no hospitalizations and no death. Dr. Arnold, please follow up with that. Chime in on that, the vaccination.
Yes. Yeah, and that is the real issue, is that we are trying to prevent people from being seriously ill, ending up on ventilators, and possibly dying. And so the vaccines, people worry about, well, how efficacious is the vaccine? If I get the vaccine, am I not going to get COVID? Is that going to stop me from getting COVID? And the answer is no. You might, in some cases it will actually block it and protect you up to 95% efficacy. If you fall into that group where you happen to get the COVID, then you'll get a mild to moderate case. So it'll feel like a regular cold, but you will not, 100% will not be hospitalized or end up in the ICU or end up dying.
That's powerful. Dr. Phillips, please.
I wanted to add on to what Dr. Arnold was saying. There actually was a recent article looking at the real world data of Pfizer vaccine, because what they looked at was about almost 4,000 healthcare workers who had been vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine, which is one of the mRNA vaccines. And as Dr. Arnold just said, yes, hospitalizations and illness were dramatically improved by it. The other thing that was a unexpected blessing was it also showed that there was a decreased rate of infection. So in addition to protecting you against serious illness, it also appears that there's some protection against getting infected as well for those who are vaccinated. And this was data that was gathered from vaccinated healthcare workers, frontline workers.
Yeah, and then to add to that, also you have a less risk of transmission, of transmitting to someone else. So you're also protecting your family when you do that as well.
And on top of that, Dr. Arnold, the other blessing is less virus in the environment, less triggers for mutation leading to other variants. So if we want our vaccines to work, we need to make sure that we continue to encourage vaccinations, but also the benefit of that is the concern that people have about, well, will I need to get a booster or not? The longer that we have high levels of virus out in the environment, the more likely the chance that the vaccines will not be as efficacious in the long run as we would like. So again, that's another thing they're saying, is that the battle to get vaccinated is real, because the other part of it is, one of the other things that we're looking at was, is it more effective to get on people about not being safe and masking, etc.? I don't know if that's going to be an effective thing as you see the pictures. People are traveling all over the place. So if you're going to travel, maybe the safest way to do it, if you don't want to curtail it, is to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
And so the video also talked about, as we know now, 3 different vaccinations, right? So we know about Pfizer, we know about Moderna, and then most recently Johnson & Johnson. So to the people that don't know, they may be asking, well, if they have a choice, I think sometimes they may not even have a choice, but if they do have a choice, should they be trying to get one versus the other?
As the video pointed out, the trials, the clinical trials for Pfizer and Moderna were done from June through November. The Johnson & Johnson trial was done from about November over into January, around that time. So during the flu season, and also at the time, and it was also done in other foreign countries where they had the variants. So the question is, okay, when they reported back, they said it's 64% efficacy for the Johnson & Johnson, 95% for Pfizer, 92% for Moderna. The reality is Johnson & Johnson might be better than Pfizer or Moderna if they were tried at the same time under the same conditions, only in the U.S. So they're all messenger RNA virus, vectors. So the likelihood that there's really any real significant difference is little. It's very small.
Brother Gardner, if you could chime in as it relates to the vaccinations and the availability. As always, people want to know what's the government doing, please.
Brother and Fofo, as people are aware, the vaccines are becoming more and more readily available. And I think a lot of states are going down to age 16 across the country, and some are doing it at different stages because the rollout is proceeding. But again, as we said last week, and I think on our last webinar, the issue is making the other 50% that don't want to get vaccinated to move them to wanting to have at least consider the vaccination. And this is a question I have for all 3 of the doctors on the panel here. Do you think we made a mistake by focusing so much on the efficacy rates of the vaccine versus saying we have vaccines available? Because you hear this from a lot of lay people, one vaccine is better than the other. Now, we just saw this good video, but for those that don't see the video, how do we let them know it's more important to get the vaccine versus which one you get? And I think that's one of those things that we need to spend a lot of time on talking about.
Well, I'll just chime in there a little bit. Our brother, you muted, brother. Chime in a little bit there. My philosophy has always been from the beginning is whatever vaccine is available is the vaccine you should get, because that's the way we're going to put this pandemic behind us. And at the same time, we're starting to see a little bit of work being done on all 3 of the variants for pediatric vaccines as well. That's going to be very, very significant in the upcoming school year. So I think that, we can dispel this thing about one is more efficacious than the other. I've seen people say the exact same thing, but I tell people all the time that, 69%, I always say from the beginning, a 69% efficacy is better than a 0% freedom from death if you get COVID-19 disease. So, there's always a chance of getting the disease and getting severe disease and not surviving from it. So any efficacy of any vaccine is well worth taking the vaccine, in my opinion.
Yeah,
and I think what Dr. Boykin was saying, and we accept the flu shot, which is anywhere from 45 to 55, 60%,
right,
if that, efficacy, and we're accepting of that. So again, these vaccines, and they've been researched very well, have shown to be even better than what we are normally accepting of. Pardon me, Dr. Arnold. You go ahead, sir.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, and I've actually talked about that sometimes with people. That about the comparison with the flu vaccine. And Dr. Boykin was absolutely on target with that. Everything he said. That people should get it and stop this pandemic and shut it down. And I think in answer to your question, Brother Gardner, of what we should say to the community. Now, I think the CDC and the news media have made a mistake by putting out the vaccines in terms of efficacy. That there's a 95 and 92%, and to give people a comparison. So people are not natural shoppers. They're going to say, hey, I want the 95, if you have a choice, it's just logical, right? Yeah. But I think the message that we need to get out to the community is that all of them are 100% effective at preventing them from being hospitalized or dying.
And brother,
that's the message.
If I can add to this, and again, I don't want anyone to take this and run with it, but one of the things that we're looking at now as a government is that there are a lot of travel industries, like the cruise industry right now, that are already making decisions that if you want to go on a cruise, you're going to have to show some type of proof that you have vaccination. And so what we're doing right now, we're looking at a lot of different vendors across the entire globe of trying to come up with a universal standard where people can take their vaccination, put in the lot number, I believe, for shot number 1, the lot number for shot number 2, so that they can, number 1, say they are vaccinated. Number 2, that if something were to happen, they could go back and test why that particular lot or whatever did not work or work as effective. The doctors talk about that more. But the takeaway is this, that going into our post-COVID world, for the foreseeable future, I believe, and I just want everyone to know this, that there will be some kind of identification, like a passport card or a shot record or something that you're going to have when you start talking about leaving the borders of the United States. Don't know how soon it's going to happen. So I would encourage everybody, if you're talking about taking any kind of trip or any kind of sense of normalcy, get that vaccine and do like a lot of people take that shot record you get and laminate it, so that when the time comes for them to put it in some kind of database or system, if your doctor does not already have it, which they should, you'll be ready to do that. So brothers, I'm telling you, that's coming down the pike. You heard it from me first. So keep a hold of that record, and you're going to need it as we go forward.
Let us pray they don't tie that to voting rights, So
they already have in Georgia.
That's a whole other topic.
Let's discuss quickly before we move to our next segment. Let's discuss quickly this terminology that we're hearing, fully vaccinated. Now, some people, especially people that are getting a 1-dose Johnson & Johnson, they feel that, or they may think that once they get that shot today, boom, they're vaccinated. Dr. Phillips, can you talk about what the true definition is of fully vaccinated and the time frame?
So what fully vaccinated means is that your immune system is capable of, with full strength, fighting COVID. After the Johnson & Johnson 1 shot, it's 2 weeks after that. After the Moderna 28-day first and second shot, it's 2 weeks after that. After the Pfizer 21-day interval between first and second shot, it's 2 weeks after the second shot. Again, and what we have started to see, I have had 2 patients who've traveled prematurely, and both of them came back with COVID. So again, if you are out here trying to do the most, I like to tie it into a little bit of humor. The movie Old School, which is one of the fun ones for me, don't be Hank the Tank and think you could run around town butt naked without a vaccine, or without your vaccine fully working, because if you're not doing that, then you are not giving yourself that, as we just stated, that 100% effective rate in preventing serious disease, hospitalization, and death. But if you go out here before you are ready, unfortunately, you are fair game for COVID. And that's another scenario that COVID is lurking and looking and waiting for. So we really need to be patient because, as I mentioned earlier in my initial remarks, one of the things that have led to us having an increase as of recent has been travel. And a lot of people, and they send me their pictures or post them. And they also send me their pictures of being vaccinated, and it hasn't been 2 weeks since their second shot.
Right.
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 Yeah. And on top of that, the thing is that they found that the vaccines are actually effective against the variants. So the virus is mutated, but it's only done what's called a genetic drift, where you have a slight change in the proteins of spike proteins of the virus. So the vaccine still recognizes those spikes and can wipe it out. As opposed to a genetic, a skip where it becomes a totally different virus, and in the vaccine, your immune system can't recognize it. But the problem is that, as Brother Phillips was saying, is if you go overseas, you're now going into an area where there are variants, and the variants is like spreading like wildfire, like 20 times fast as the virus, as the COVID we have here, the COVID-19. And so you're actually jumping into the fire when you walk out there, when you go overseas, when you're not fully vaccinated. And it takes, as Brother Phillips was saying, it takes 2 weeks for your immune system to build up the memory and the antibodies to fight off the virus.
Outstanding. So let's move into our next segue. And I'm going to give a shout out to one of our fraternity brothers, Brother Loco. I see your question, and you must have my script, Brother Loco, because it's right to our next segment. Dr. Boykin, from the pediatric standpoint, we realized that in the fall, a lot of schools are going to open back up. Some schools have even started now on hybrid system. Can you talk to us about vaccinations as it relates to our children, and how we can, get our children back to school? So, Dr. Boykin, please.
Well, thank you, Brother Mpofu. First and foremost, our high schoolers already are capable of getting the Pfizer vaccine because it's already approved for 16 years and older. But I'm sure everybody heard on the news today, the Pfizer came out with a 12 to 15, 100% efficacy vaccine. So that's a big promise. Again, don't get hung up by the efficacy 100%, because that just means in the small group of 2,260 kids, those that got the vaccine, none of them had any COVID, and a few of those that got the placebo did get COVID disease. So it just means that we have another tool for our kids, 12 to 15-year-olds that are coming out, and it's pretty much thought that this is going to be available by the fall this year. Now, there are other studies out there for younger kids under the age of 12. That Moderna has one, and Pfizer also has one out there. They're both working on the younger kids, but they're probably not going to be available to sometime next year. But the hopeful is that these adolescents and these 12 to 15-year-olds can be vaccinated by the fall, because as you see, most of these vaccines are getting ready to come out for FDA review very, very soon, because they're getting towards the end of the clinical trial study. But remember, these vaccines still have to be studied for some time after they've been released. It means that the kids have to be studied for at least 1 to 2 years afterwards to see what the real efficacy rate is going to be, what the real preventative rate is going to be. I mean, if you look back at the old data when we first started talking about COVID-19, we realized that kids over the age of 10 had a higher propensity to transmit disease. And folks, don't be fooled by this. You might not see a lot of stuff in the news about kids being hospitalized with COVID-19 disease, but they are. There's a significant amount of children out there being hospitalized, and there's a significant amount of pediatric death out there as well. So my hope is that with the advent of these studies coming out, most of them in the later phases, ready to be released. As a matter of fact, Moderna's 6 month to 11-year-old study is already starting to vaccinate that group. And I think the other one was I'm trying to think off the top of my head, Pfizer, and their 6 month to 11-year-old. set of 9-year-old twins have already received a vaccine, and I believe in Moderna, a set of a very young child, probably under the age of 2, has gotten the vaccine. So there's hope out there for the kids of that age group. But Moderna has had a teen cold vaccination trial going on for some time, probably along the same time, the October timeframe was a flat curve. So the study is closed, and those information will come out very soon too. So we have Moderna with their 12-year-old and above. We have Pfizer with 12-year-old and above. And Johnson & Johnson is certainly going to be coming out with their own version of clinical trials. They're already in the process of planning that for our kids in the future. So my hope is that at least kids would be able to get one of the two, Moderna or Pfizer in the fall, if not Johnson & Johnson next year. But everybody over the age of 6 months, hopefully by this time next year, will have been vaccinated against COVID-19 disease.
Outstanding. Dr. Arnold, from your profession, what you see and what you deal with on a day-to-day basis, any thoughts as it relates to our children being vaccinated?
Yeah. I think they're under a lot of stress. Normally, our kids are under a lot of stress to begin with, during normal times. But now they're isolated. They're forced to stay at home, doing online learning, and that in itself can be a nightmare for kids, to try to figure out the systems and work through them, and also the tensions at home tend to be much higher because people are in close proximity to each other. And they have lost then also their social contacts, So developmentally, it affects them in terms of their socialization skills, and depending on what grade they're in and what level they're at, can have various effects. It particularly hits hard on the younger kids, like the 1st to 5th grade, who are just beginning to develop their social skills and their ability to talk and communicate with each other and to form normal, social relations, and then also the other group is the teenagers, who all of a sudden were cut off from all their friends, and they, a lot of them were into texting anyway prior to COVID, but they did get together and talk every now and then and actually socialize, And so I think it's put a tremendous stress on them mentally to deal with this. And one thing that concerns me is the social media environment where people have been very critical of each other sometimes and said things kind of knocking people down and that type of thing and attacking them online. And when you do that to someone who's in isolation, who now doesn't have their friends around to help support them, and if they're not the type of kid who's going to reach out and say, look, I just got this thing on my, social media about me, what do you think I should do? Then they're going to sit there and suffer. And many of them, some will end up in depression. And our concern is mostly about teen suicide,
So let me go to the chat. We've got an interesting question. I'm sure as doctors you've dealt with this, but I'm going to ask it. It says, if I've had COVID, they're asymptomatic already, and I'm young and healthy, do I need to get vaccinated? That's the question. But there's some additional information. There's some additional information here. They also say, I'm asking because although the vaccine is approved due to this emergency, what we don't know is the long-term effects of this vaccine. Long-term effects such as potential sterilization, etc. If we are still young, why should we risk these long-term effects?
Hey, before the brothers answer that question, can I add a little more realism to that? I had the same question I was going to ask because my daughter-in-law is a long hauler. She had COVID in January, and my grandson contracted as well. Kid got hot. He wanted to run around the house butt naked. Okay, we're family. He took off his clothes, except for his underwear, and ran around. Now, he's scheduled to go back to school on April the 19th, I think, here in Maryland. And the conversation we just had at my dinner table, the guy that's pushing for this vaccine, my daughter-in-law looked at me. She said, Papa, look, Cam had just had COVID. I'm the one suffering the long haul. I'm going to get my vaccine, but why am I going to give my baby the vaccine when he's already had it, 9 years old, right? He's come through it. And I think that's emblematic of the question that Brother Amphofo asked, because people are genuinely concerned. And, that's my grandson. I'm saying, hey, I think you should do it, but I'd like to hear the answer as well, because those are real live questions and situations that the ethical dilemma they're dealing with, right? Because you don't want to have to give your kids something if they don't need it. But at the same time, you want to protect them. So how do you do that? And so that's a good question, Brother Amfofo, that was in the chat call there.
So yeah, I'll let you guys. I'd like to hear from all three of you. So I don't know who wants to go first. Just come off, Dr. Boykin, please.
I'll jump out there since Lord is.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Yeah, go ahead, Dr.
Well, again, as we mentioned earlier, the young people are more at risk for spreading it. Now, if you look at the school system, the kids tend to get it from the teachers and the staff.
Yes.
Absolutely. So again, if you don't want your kid bringing it up in the house, you might want to protect in that way.
Yeah.
In addition to that, we also just said that one of the ways to prevent the increase of these variants and the continued mutation ongoing is decreasing the virus in the environment. And what we have seen with the real life data from the Pfizer study most recently of healthcare workers is that vaccine prevents infection, which could lower the infection rate in the community, which could, number one, protect from more mutations. Number two, protect them from spreading it to someone that they care about or someone that is involved in their life who may be vulnerable. And number three, because we are all aching for normality, the quickest way and the surest way that we can get to that point is getting more of us vaccinated.
Absolutely. And I want to add to that first and foremost, just because you've had the COVID-19 disease doesn't mean you have lifelong immunity. The antibodies are going to wane off at a certain point in time. And most studies suggest now about 90 days, although there's some people out there, some outliers are saying it might be a little bit longer. So remember, if you've had the vaccine, the disease, you still can get it again because you're not going to be protected forever. So that's one of the reasons to get the vaccine, even if you've had it. And second of all, we know that children can probably be carriers and not know it, or to be misdiagnosed as having some type of flu-like illness, and they may have COVID again. So I think with the fact that if we vaccinate these kids, even though they've had the disease, then we don't have to worry about that particular part of it.
Yeah, and in terms of testing them, you can have a lot of false negatives. So there's a percentage of people who get missed even though they were tested. And the other thing I think about is like that you don't get full immunity once you get it, and so you can get repeated infections. And my concern about that is if you weigh that against the vaccine, risk inherent in vaccines. This is probably the mechanism they use for this vaccine is actually, I think, safer than the flu vaccine in the science of it, right? And the issue is if you get repeated infections as a child, my concern, which hasn't been talked about much, in the media or anywhere else, is what are the long-term risk factors that occur if this virus is attacking your heart, your kidneys, your lungs, the lining of your lungs, and you're young enough where it doesn't knock you down. It doesn't give you, major symptoms, but it causes some damage. And as you get older, my concern is when they get to being 40, 50, 60 years old, what's going to happen?
Absolutely.
So in the long term, my concern is the risk is much higher if you get that virus and if you don't have full immunity.
Absolutely.
If I can, let me ask all four of you a question. I'm curious to hear from all four of you. I believe this is a question that everybody is basically dying to know the answer to. We've been doing this for over a year, right? And you all have alluded to it. Everybody's ready to go out. Everybody's ready to go on vacations. Everybody's ready to just get out of hibernation.
Right.
Question is, what are your thoughts? What does it take for us to get back? I'm not going to say get back to normal. I'm just going to say get back to pre-COVID. What is it going to take? Do we need the U.S. to be at a certain percentage as it relates to vaccination? What is it going to take for us to get back to what some would call normal? Let's start with Brother Gardner from a government's perspective. You're on mute, Brother Gardner. Let's come off mute for us.
That question came up last week, and here is because we were talking about the new normal. What does it look like when we're going to go back to work? And what does it look like when we're going to open up the government? Just like it took a gradual step down for people to realize this pandemic was real and the government shut down and whatnot, and people are staying up, it's going to be the same thing with the wrap up. It's amazing how now the government is the one crying, hey guys, follow science, and states and everyone want to liberate, open themselves up. I think it's going to be on an individual by individual basis. Here's what I mean by that. And that's why I asked the question we asked earlier about children. At some point in time, we're all going to have to make an individual decision to say we've been vaccinated, we're following the CDC guidelines, and we're going to put our toe back in the water. But when you put your toe back in the water, you've got to do it in a methodical, safe way. There was a survey that was put out, I think last week, about are people willing to return back to public events and arenas for sporting events? And I was surprised by the answer. It said over 47% of Americans were not ready for that. So there's a psyche playing right now. It's like after being in the war, you want to stick your head up, or you're waiting for the next guy to put his head out first, see if it's safe to go out, and then you go back in. You've got others that are just so frustrated, they're going to jump out there and damn the science, damn everything else, I'm going to go do it. So the question about when it's going to be normal is going to be when I think the medical and science professions have a chance to catch their breath, number one, when hospitals and everything are able to say they're back in some kind of normal trajectory, because people don't realize and talk about this a lot. Our medical establishment is worn out. They're tired. The toll is taken. They lost some of their colleagues, and they're depleted. And so, you know, we talk about regeneration of an entity. Our hospital and our medical centers have to be regenerated, number one. So we don't want to overtax them by people getting sick too early. And so I think it's going to be a bit by bit. And I was hoping that with this new administration, we could do it in a methodical way. But because we're still playing politics, some are opening up faster than they should, and some are doing things they should not do. And I was really encouraged by the governor of West Virginia when he said, we're going to open up our bars and everything. But guess what? If you're not drinking, you're going to put on a mask. At least there's a compromise somewhere in there where they're trying to do some things the right way. And so, brother, and from my perspective, I'm not sure how that looks, but we'll know when we get there, because it's going to be something that's going to evolve as we go through this on a day by day, week by week, and month by month process as we do this.
Thank you so much, Brother Gardner. Dr. Phillips, please, your thoughts.
Well, you know, I just read this article about there was a city in Brazil, and this city had the distinction early on where they had at least 75% of their population was infected with COVID last year. So by what we have been saying, you know, they should have been at herd immunity. So unfortunately, as human nature has shown us, after that moment, everybody stopped, they relaxed their mask. And then what happened? They got a variant. And that variant, unfortunately, as Dr. Arnold alluded to, was not a close jump. It was a big jump. So it was significantly different than what they had experienced before. And our brothers and sisters in Brazil, they're the epicenter of the world right now. They have the highest incidence. So my point in mentioning that story is that with these variants out there, as Brother Gardner just said, I don't think that we have an opportunity in a big way to be back to where we were. You know, in smaller, you know, if me, Dr. Boykin, Dr. Arnold, Brother Gardner, and yourself want to get together in an in-house way without masks because we are all vaccinated, we can do that. But we're not going to the Clave. We're not going to Seersucker and Sundresses. We're not going to Harrisburg. We're not going to any of those places right now, you know, because unfortunately, we haven't gotten a handle on this. And the big wild card here is the variants. So I think as we start to understand them, even if we are vaccinated, we have to use the example of Brazil, because in that city, which as we've defined it, 70 to 80% of the general population either being infected or vaccinated, they had that. But they also, unfortunately, didn't expect the variants, and the variants sidestepped all of the immunity they thought they had. And now look where Brazil is.
Wow. Dr. Boykin, if you want to come off mute and please chime in.
Well, I think I agree with everything that has been said so far. But one thing we have to absolutely understand is that we are not in a phase 4 long-term study of any of these vaccines. You know, it's been said that if you've been vaccinated, you can go out, you can get together in small groups, but that means inside. When you go out in public, you still have to wear your mask, wash your hands, and do all those types of things. And until we have some more long-term data, we're not going to know what's going to be the end point. So we have to be very, very cautious about assuming that because we've been fully vaccinated, that the world turns back on where it stopped at. It's not going to be a part where we're going to just flip the switch and go back to normalcy from that point in time. Because we know that the most of the spread in my particular situation is from adult to adult, then down to kids, and then back to the adult. So we got to take that type of situation in hand. We got to mitigate that particular thing because we got to get these kids back in school, as Dr. Arnold so eloquently said. You know, these kids are going out, especially teenagers. They have more emergency room visits. They have more people, more teenagers committing suicide because they can't get back to school. So we have to figure that out to get back to some type of normalcy, and we got to get these kids back in school. So I think that we take those in consideration. If we have some type of plan to get these kids back in school, we can't be fooled by this recent suggestions by the CDC that only 3 feet apart in school, because that's for younger kids in certain situations, because all the adults have to still be 6 feet apart. So it's not going to be a magic switch you can turn back on. There are a lot of things, a lot of factors in it, and a lot of repercussions if we don't follow those factors. Herd immunity, everybody talks about 80%, 70%. I don't think anybody knows what it's really going to be until we get to the end point of a long-term effect of studying these vaccines after they've been fully released, not just emergency use authorization released, but fully released. And then we can tell where we're going to go and where we're going to be at that particular point in time.
Okay, we're at the point where we're getting ready to end this thing. Our time always goes fast, but Dr. Arnold, if you could please chime in, and if you want to give us some closing remarks, we'll get ready to prepare to close. Dr. Arnold.
Right. Yeah, and I fully agree with everything every brother said on here. I think these are very, trying times. And the thing, when we talk about getting back to normal, the real issue is that the virus now is endemic, in the country. And so just like the flu, and so when people talk about COVID-19, they don't realize that if COVID virus has been here since the 70s and is, responsible for the flu and other things. This is just a more virulent form of the COVID virus. And so it's going to be here, and we're going to probably have to get vaccinated against it with our regular vaccinations. And there's going to be more coming along, in the future. So what has to happen is that people have to really understand this and get educated, so we act fast. So when that next virus comes up, COVID 2022 or 27 or COVID 30, that we're ready for it. And luckily, we have to really thank God for the fact that we have a rapid way of developing vaccines now, so we can get to the vaccine being available and protect people and knock out those viruses when they occur. So there was someone from the CDC was saying recently. He said there is going to be a next virus, not if, there is. Yeah, it's going to happen.
As we prepare to close, I'm just eyeing the chat, and just very quickly, in your final remarks as you go around, one of the things somebody is asking again about the long-term risk factors of the vaccine. So if there's anything in your remarks as it relates to that, and then also someone just in general wants to know about planning vacations if we are vaccinated. Your thoughts, and they even quoted Brother Wonzie. So with that being said, we'll go around for our closing remarks. Dr. Arnold, and you can address those and just briefly.
Vaccines have been around for a long time. Okay, so we get the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. 3 vaccines at once. When we're children, we get the DPTs, the diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, protection. So we've been getting vaccines our whole life, and luckily, and the polio vaccine And, so when those vaccines go away, people don't remember back in the past when polio hit and it paralyzed, several hundred thousands of people or more, that's something to keep in mind, that the vaccines are efficient, that they are generally they're safe. I don't think this is going to, the safety of this is not going to be an issue. The issue is the virus, because that's the enemy, and that's what's going to take us out. And it's already taken out over 500,000 people in the country.
Very good. Thank you so much, Dr. Arnold. And then just another one.
Yeah.
Research is showing that vitamin D, C, and K are just as effective. How come we're not pushing for that as well? It's cheaper and quicker. Dr.
Absolutely
Phillips? Oh, well, I'm sorry. Dr. Boykin, please come off mute and chime in.
No, they're not as effective as vaccines. They're good supplements to take. I will say that, but that's just absolutely a big myth. I don't know what research is showing that, because nobody's come out and said that. I think we're still living in last year's technology and last year's thinking about that. But the vitamin D is good to help treat COVID-19 disease, but it does not prevent COVID-19 infection. That's what people have to understand. These things are used to treat the effectiveness of the disease if you get it, but they don't prevent from getting infection. The only thing you can prevent from getting an infection is it can be a vaccine or isolating yourself from the rest of the world. So I would say to you all, if you are considering getting a vaccine, do the adequate proper research. Particularly, speak to your physician, your primary care person, and that's who you should be making a decision with if you're unsure about your health and your health problems. If you're a healthy person, yes, you should still get the vaccine. Because I always like to say this: if there's going to be a pandemic bust, it's up to us. So I'll leave you with that, Brother Popo.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boykin. Dr. Phillips, your closing remarks.
Again, vitamin D, you go ahead and do that if you want to. And, again, you may, but you may not. And as we know, again, COVID, you may get through it, but we have seen you can get it again. And just because you had it mild the first time don't mean you won't die the second time. The other thing, as we start to get more information, I saw a patient just a few minutes ago who's a long hauler, young person. So that's another thing that unfortunately has a higher association with more serious COVID. When we talk about travel, how do the variants get around the country, you think? Traveling. So again, y'all, I know you want to go. My wife is asking me to go somewhere, and I want to go somewhere, but I don't want to be the vehicle to bring the South Beach variant to New York, or the Virginia Beach variant, or wherever you want to go, the St. Croix variant. But again, the way these variants are getting around is because we are traveling. If I was going to take a trip, I would go in my car. I would drive to somebody else like Dr. Boykin's house, and I would stay with, that's what I would do if I'm traveling now. I'm not doing no resort stuff, because again, you just put yourself at risk. Now, you may not get sick, but you could be part of the spreading process. So as the CDC head just said, as we have talked about in our frat songs, hold it steady. We got to stay vigilant right now, y'all, because we at 18, 19, and we want to jump out the cut. You got to stay in the cut. You got to stay in the cut, man. And coming out the cut is going to give this thing the opportunity to continue to impact and influence and upset your life. So if we make this investment now, later on, we might see some normalcy where we can go to those places we would like to go to and gather in those ways that we would like to gather. So my last point is the battle of vaccination versus the variants. The more of us that get vaccinated, the less of an issue that these variants can pose for us. So with that being said, I thank you for this time and salute to the other professionals and experts that are presented tonight.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phillips. Brother Gardner, we got about 65 seconds.
It's hard to follow Brother Phillips. It's hard to do that. I mean, he put people in the cut. He talked about, but listen, I can't disagree with my brother, but I'll take an alternative view a little bit. If you're going to do that, because I also like to plan for those that are going to do it regardless. and I will leave you with this. Be cautious in your planning. Be careful in your considerations, and be conservative in your actions, whatever you do. Okay, because this is not over yet. And if you can be hardcore like Brother Phillips, listen to him all the way. But if you can't, look at the 3 C's: careful, considerate, and cautious in everything you do. And to my brothers on the screen, our guest speaker, love you, man. I love you guys. And I appreciate you for the therapy that you provide me each and every time. So this is good stuff. Thank you, Brother Amphofos. Turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much. Listen to all of our guests that joined us on this evening, to all of our NPHC fraternity brothers, sorority sisters. Thank you so much. To all our friends and family that joined us. I hope this information has been helpful. To our 4 horsemen, also shout out to our friend, our boy Giz. We know what he's doing, and so we appreciate all that he does. Certainly to all the brothers of the 2nd District that brought this to you, I want to just thank all of you on behalf of our Grand Bossless, Dr. David E. Marion, who allows us to do the work of our great fraternity. Tune in at the end of next month. Every last Wednesday, we are here. And certainly, brothers, you have an opportunity to meet every week. Tune into a local chapter of the 2nd District to get that information. Again, I am Kelvin Ampofo, and we are signing out. Thank you. Stay safe. Stay well. Be blessed.